Welcome! Whether you're directly involved with disaster recovery or just looking to understand the process, this video is designed for you. This video provides an overview of roles and responsibilities and key activities in the preliminary damage assessment process by answering these questions. What is a preliminary damage assessment or PDA? Who plays a part in the PDA process? How is it conducted? What are some important things to keep in mind? Where can we learn more? What is a preliminary damage assessment or PDA? A preliminary damage assessment is a process used to determine the impact and magnitude of damage after an incident and the resulting unmet needs of the jurisdiction. Recovery is centered around the needs of the local community. After a disaster, local authorities quickly assess and identify the impact on their jurisdiction and gather critical information. Damage data collected through an initial damage assessment, or IDA, is shared with the state and federal governments to determine if a joint PDA is warranted. To see more information about the initial damage assessment, refer to the IDA job aid. To learn more about the data collected during this process, visit the Using Data video in this series, or refer to the initial damage assessment checklists on fema.gov/PDA. If the damage from the initial damage assessment points to recovery efforts that will exceed state, local, tribal nation, or territory resources, state, tribal, or territory officials may request a joint PDA with FEMA. The joint PDA is a coordinated effort by states, local governments, tribal nation, territorial governments, and FEMA to validate damage data. Once IDA data is validated, the results of the joint PDA inform presidential disaster declaration requests and federal disaster grant determinations. PDAs take place after a disaster. The joint PDA takes place when a state, tribal nation, or territory request has been granted by the FEMA regional office and has been scheduled in coordination with the state, local government, tribal nation, or territory. A joint preliminary damage assessment is the coordinated effort by SLTT and federal authorities to validate damage data previously identified through the IDA by state, tribal nation, and local authorities to inform presidential disaster declaration requests and federal disaster grant determinations. The PDA process can help communities recover in the following ways: by validating information identified during the IDA, by providing identified damage data to the state, tribal nation, or territory in making a decision to request a presidential disaster declaration, by informing the FEMA regional administrator's recommendation for federal programs that can be made available to impacted communities, and by informing the president's decision to declare a major disaster. The PDA may also be helpful in informing long-term recovery, preparedness, mitigation, and resilience strategies. Now that we have explained what the PDA process is, when it takes place, and why it is important, we'll discuss who plays a part in the preliminary damage assessment process. Who completes the preliminary damage assessment process? State, tribal nation, or territorial governments are responsible for working with local emergency managers to assess whether initial damage assessment information is complete and aligned with FEMA PDA standards. They also manage the PDA planning process, review damage identified during the initial damage assessment, and decide whether they should request a joint PDA from their FEMA regional office. After the joint PDA is complete, the governor will decide whether to request a presidential disaster declaration. Tribal nations can take on different roles depending on how they choose to request disaster assistance from FEMA. They also conduct initial damage assessments and may participate in the joint PDA. For more information about the flexible options for tribal nations, reference FEMA's Tribal Declarations Guidance. Local emergency managers are responsible for gathering information about the location, ownership, occupancy, and insurance coverage of impacted residents and categorizing damage. They must use initial damage assessments to collect data and submit it to their state, tribal nation, or territorial government officials. FEMA regional offices coordinate with state, tribal nation, and territorial officials to conduct joint PDAs. The FEMA PDA coordinator reports to the FEMA Regional Recovery Division Director, often through the Regional Individual Assistance Branch Chief. After the joint PDA, FEMA regional officials recommend to FEMA headquarters whether a presidential disaster declaration should be made based on declaration factors. Representatives from all of these groups form the joint PDA team. Representatives from other federal agencies, such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Small Business Administration, and Environmental Protection Agency, may also be part of the joint PDA team, alongside subject matter experts such as engineers. The team visits impacted communities and works together to validate damages identified during initial damage assessments. Conducting a PDA is a multi-step process. Every PDA is different based on the unique disaster. The following process is meant to set a foundation for efficient and timely coordination for emergency managers at all levels of government. Before the PDA process begins, effective planning and preparation are essential to accurately and efficiently assess damage. The FEMA PDA Guide provides a breakdown of readiness and planning activities that can assist jurisdictions to plan before an incident occurs. Prior to a joint PDA, local, tribal, nation, or territorial governments conduct the initial damage assessment and identify damage. Their jurisdictional leadership review of the initial damage assessment and decide whether to request a joint PDA with FEMA. If they decide to request a joint PDA, the governor or tribal nation chief executive will submit a request to the FEMA regional office using the PDA request template. The state, tribal nation, or territory and FEMA will conduct the joint PDA if the request is granted. FEMA and the state, tribal nation, or territory will develop a joint PDA plan of action and choose a methodology to validate damage and address program-specific reporting requirements. Once the joint PDA is complete, the state, tribal nation, or territory requests a presidential disaster declaration and submits the request to the FEMA regional administrator. The FEMA regional administrator reviews the requests and submits their recommendations to FEMA headquarters, who submits the recommendations to the president. The president approves either fully, in part, or denies the request. If the jurisdiction seeks to appeal the president's decision, states and territories must submit an appeal within 30 days of the date on the denial letter. Tribal nations must submit appeals within 60 days. It is important to remember some key things about the PDA process. Like we discussed at the beginning of this video, local governments and tribal nations must use initial damage assessments to establish a strong foundation for disaster declaration requests. FEMA will validate this information as part of the joint PDA if one is requested. FEMA's role in the joint PDA is to validate the IDA data, beginning with the most critical and costly damage. For incidents affecting tribal nations, the decision to request FEMA assistance directly should not be made until PDAs have taken place in coordination and collaboration with FEMA and the states. If the tribal nation decides to pursue a joint PDA, the tribal nation should request a joint PDA through the FEMA region, with the region facilitating further communication and to initiate the damage assessment and provide additional information on their options. If the magnitude of anticipated or actual impacts of an incident is outside the resources of the STT government to respond, an STT government may request and FEMA may submit a recommendation for an expedited disaster declaration to the President with or without completing the joint PDA. The preliminary damage assessment is still required, but will take place when conditions are safe. Refer to FEMA's declaration guidance for more information. Federal disaster recovery programs like FEMA's Individual Assistance IA and Public Assistance PA each have specific program requirements that FEMA needs to validate, depending on the federal programs the state, tribal nation, or territory plans to request. These are called factors. Finally, even if a federal disaster declaration is not granted, preliminary damage assessment findings can still be used by the states, tribal nations, and territories to support disaster recovery planning, request assistance from non-federal programs, and refine future mitigation strategies. There are a number of resources, templates, and materials available to help you through the PDA process. Initial damage assessment templates for both IA and PA, initial damage assessment checklist, preliminary damage assessment request letter template. To learn more about the topics covered in this video, we recommend reading the resources and information listed here. Preliminary damage assessment webpage, initial damage assessment templates webpage, Tribal Nations Declaration Interim Guidance, Preliminary Damage Assessment Guide, Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, Individual Assistance Program and Policy Guide. Thank you for watching. Please reach out to the listed email with questions or comments.